Well, good morning, everybody. I know many of you are used to this, but just to provide a little bit of intro, this is about just a window into somebody's life and how their faith works out in the day-to-day. Dan has written studious notes here, so I think it's worthy of a quick round of applause just to encourage him.
I will forget
he's even
everything,
written a prayer. But as he shares a little bit of his story, I suggest you listen out for two particular things as I read it. One was his passion for looking after our world, but also, as Mandy preached the other day, she preached about our waiting and waiting to see a lot of the things that are in our heart fulfilled. So, Dan, let's start. And many people know that you're married to the lovely Val, and whose sister is the lovely Jill. Yes. So why don't you tell us a little bit more?
So I grew up in a place called Sonstead in South Croydon with my late mum, my dad, my brother and my sister. And I was at home till I was 30, quite unusual back then, but yes, got on with my dad, what can I say? And then moved into the centre of Croydon, bought a flat in the centre of Croydon when I was 30. Got married to Val at 38, so a bit of a late starter in lots of things, really. Long wait. And then we moved here just over a year ago, partly because we wanted to get out of Croydon, centre of busy urban Croydon for years, but also to be near our family, so yeah.
Fantastic. And you weren't too taken by church at the beginning, were you?
No. So I got dragged to Anglican church in Sonstead when I was a kid, Christmas, Easter, and I was also in the Cubs. So I had to go for church parade every month. And I like the talk in the middle. I always like that bit. That's still true now. I love the preach. I didn't really get the rest of it. Sort of lost interest in church, and then went very anti-church when hearing about some of the church leaders in the US in the late 80s, some of them who were involved in TV evangelism scandals, or there was a very, what I perceive now as homophobic attitude towards gay people who were going through the AIDS crisis. It really put me off church for 15 years, and it was only when my first marriage failed and I was trying to find something that would fix me, and that's when I became a Christian at the age of 37, so again, a long wait.
So go on, tell us a little bit about that transition. What kind of, that's quite a shift, so what really...
quite a long story, but it started probably about 5 years before, maybe a bit longer, when I realised I'd accidentally really offended one of my friends who was a Christian, and I didn't know this for a year, and then he very gently told me what I'd done, and I was appalled. And I decided then I was going to be friendly to Christians. And that was the start of it. That was the start of it. And that was the wedge. And like I say, when my first marriage collapsed, you look for something else.
Yeah. God uses every bit as well.
Yeah. And now I have to say also Val was a bit of a cog in that as well, giving me Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. And so there were a few things going on.
That did it for me as well, actually, so that's interesting. But faith has quite tangible expressions for you, particularly, I think, both in music, but also in your view of the environment and God's earth.
Yeah, so the environment thing is something, Val has been very into it, and I'm very much supportive of that. We've been going to Greenbelt for years, the big Christian festival, Arts and Faith Festival. They've done a lot of things about environment. Of course, we all know what's happening to the environment. So we've made personal choices to try and make the world a bit of a better place. And we're in the position where we can do that because we haven't got kids. So we can do things like give up the car, give up flying, give up meat. It's not so easy for other people, but we're able to do that, and we try and encourage other people, even if it's just small changes, and we see it as as part of our worship is to look after the planet, look after the world around us, and look after the people around us, our neighbour, both directly and in other countries. So.
And tell us a little bit about, because it's something you've worked in IT, I think, and corporate IT for quite a long time, but there's something of a passion that God's put in your heart for a long time, and you've been seeking God about that, and I think there's other people here who might be in a similar position. Tell us a little bit of that, and maybe how God's speaking now, and how you're pursuing that now.
So, I think when I was about 11, I realised I wanted to be some sort of full-time artist. And at the time, I wanted to be a special effects person. Star Wars had not long been out. I wanted to make spaceships fly. That's what I wanted to do. And that transmuted into music, and I've made underground experimental music for the last 40 years. But there's not a lot of money in it. So I ended up getting a corporate IT job, and I did that for 36 years and did all the art stuff on the side, but always wanting to be a full-time artist and asking God about it, trying different things, and nothing ever seemed to click. Well, so I burnt out last year at work, and that was my sign, whether it was just a sign of what had happened in work or whether it's actually God doing work. I think it was probably God doing work, because I'd had a thing for a few years where time to stop, time to do something else. So I stopped that job last year, and now I'm just starting to become a full-time artist, and I'm hoping to do an MA in art in September, if they'll have me. And that's really to extend. So I did a thing here called Winter Rest, end of December, which was a sound-based meditation, which some people were very kind enough to come along to, and it seemed to work really well, which I was so pleased about, because it was a massive experiment. So it would be, one of the ideas is to take that concept but expand it for secular audiences as a way to point the way a little bit towards God, sort of non-threatening and very accepting and inclusive way, and using a language they might understand, so an art audience would understand. But also historically there's been a big divide between art institutions and Christian artists and Christian institutions, and I think for understandable reasons, because Christians have been sometimes a bit clumsy in that area, and I'd like to be part of fixing that divide and honing it back, where art is part of Christianity and Christianity is a bit more part of art again.
Thank you, Dan. I thought as I read Dan's story that we would just it was particularly poignant for those people who were facing some kind of transition or trying to step out and things hadn't quite got to that point, almost like part of Mandy's waiting, but an active waiting, stepping forward. And Dan's just going to pray in a second. But if there's anybody who feels, if you've got the courage just to stand up, we'll particularly pray for you, who's in that sense of kind of, I'm transitioning, whatever it is. It might be transition into retirement. It might be a transition or a dream, a long-held dream of doing something different, or something God's put in your heart that hasn't seen fruition now. If you'd like to stand now, we'll particularly pray for you, and I'm going to get Dan to pray.
So this is a prayer for anybody seeking God's direction, whatever that means for you. Lord, I pray for your peace and guidance as we all seek your direction in our lives, but particularly for those, excuse me, particularly for those who are trying to reach a long-cherished dream, for those who are confused as to exactly which path to take next, and for those whose previous plans have turned out in disappointment or some sort of blockage. Lord, help us to hold our own plans lightly and to keep our hearts open to how you might want to change or even delay our plans. Lord, I know you do things ultimately for our good. So please help us to be patient, to persevere, and to ensure our plans are for the good of our neighbour, as well as our church and our family and ourselves. Thank you for your guidance, your peace, and your grace. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Dan.